Today on History You Should Know, the continuation of the real-life Game of Thrones. This is the Wars of the Roses. Sit on your throne, relax, and enjoy the video in all its glory. It's 1464. Edward IV of the House of York is the King of England, and the man who put him there, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, and the King's right-hand man, is in turmoil. Ipinahiya siya ni Edward ng magpakasal hindi lang sa isang commoner, kundi sa babaeng galing pa sa pamilyang kaaway niya, Elizabeth Woodville. Let's take a second to talk about the king's family. At this point, the king had two living brothers, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Together, they grew up surrounded by soldiers since their father, Richard, Duke of York, eventually rebelled and failed against Henry VI. That was in episode 2. Nang maging hari si Edward, tumira sila sa estate ng Earl of Warwick, kung saan nag-training sila para sa pakikipaglaban. They grew close to Warwick's family, and it's this closeness that Warwick would use in the future. In 1465, the former Lancastrian king, Henry VI, was captured and placed in the Tower of London. His family wasn't with him, but instead of killing him, Edward decided to keep him alive. Killing him would make him a martyr and rally the Lancastrians, and all Edward wanted was a lasting peace. While this was good, the Kingmaker couldn't let go of Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. He saw the Woodvilles as cunning and ambitious social climbers. Sa mga sumunod na taon, ipinamigay ni Edward ang mga importanteng posisyon sa mga kapamilya ni Elizabeth. May iba pang posisyon na galing mismo sa pamilya ni Warwick at inilipat sa Woodvilles. The Kingmaker needed to act. He needed an ally, someone he could trust, convince, and manipulate. Someone who looked up to him and possibly felt the same way about the marriage. Luckily, that someone grew up in his household, George, Duke of Clarence, the king's younger brother and technically, at this point, next in line for the throne. In the following years, Warwick convinced George that his brother was not the right leader. That was easy enough since George was ambitious and grew jealous of his brother. So, Warwick maneuvered to marry off one of his daughters to George. This was perfect because if he somehow convinces George to overthrow his brother, that would make him a future father of a queen. Noong 1469, nagkaroon ng revolt na pinamunuan ng Lancasters. To fight them off, the king sent his troops led by the Woodvilles, his father and brother-in-law being the commanders. The Yorkist forces had the upper hand until Warwick and George arrived to help the Lancastrians. After the battle, Warwick executed the Yorkist commanders, including the king's in-laws. They were even able to keep King Edward as a prisoner. Pero hindi ganoong kadaling maging hari. To overthrow someone, you need support from the nobles. Warwick wanted to install George as the new king, but he underestimated the support for King Edward, and Warwick's tendency to brutally kill nobles was a major factor. They were forced to let him go, and once he got out, the king did not recognize George as the heir to the throne because now he said that the new heir would be his daughter with Queen Elizabeth Woodville. Warwick's plan backfired because instead of getting rid of the Woodvilles, now they're next in line. George and Warwick left for France to distance themselves. Warwick was running out of options. Pero habang nandun sila, may nakipagkita sa kanya na hindi niya kailanman inakala. Margaret of Anjou. All this time, the former queen was hiding in France with her son, watching and waiting for her opportunity to return and seize power for her teenage son, Edward, son of the imprisoned Henry VI. With her new ally, and remember, former mortal enemy, the Earl of Warwick, and George, they returned to England to depose King Edward IV. Bakit sila nagkasundo? Because they all wanted power. Margaret would bring back the House of Lancaster on the throne by freeing her husband, and the heir would be their son. For Warwick, he agreed to marry off yet another one of his daughters, Anne Neville, to Edward, yung anak ni Henry VI, which would make him, again, a future father of a queen, even if George was right there. Sorry, George. In 1470, they forced King Edward and his loyal brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, out of England. Pinalaya at ginawa nilang hari muli si Henry VI. The Lancasters were back on the throne, and this time, Queen Margaret and the Earl of Warwick were actually the ones in power. George was made the new Duke of York. Surely, tapos na, di ba? Panalo na Lancastrians. Well, the truth is, if you're anything like the Earl of Warwick, gutom sa kapangyarihan, balimbing, at mamamatay tao, people tend to remember that and make you pay. By this point, the people in the court of Henry VI were both Yorkists and Lancastrians. Nakahalo-halo na. Only one man has viciously killed nobles from either side, the Earl of Warwick. The following year, 1471, the former King Edward returned to England, landing in the north, thanks to the influence of his younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Knowing that his brothers would probably win, and with the help of their relatives, George, Duke of York, turned against Warwick and allied himself with his brothers. They forgave him, and they removed him from being the Duke of York and returned him to being the Duke of Clarence. As the three sons of Richard of York marched towards London, Warwick came out to meet them in the Battle of Barnet. Warwick was no match. He attempted to escape, and Edward ordered for him to be returned alive. Ang problema, marami nang galit sa kanya. Noong nahuli siya ng Yorkists, hindi nila sinunod ang utos ng hari. They executed him on the spot, beheaded him, and paraded his body to make sure everyone knew that the Kingmaker was dead. 3 weeks later, it was Queen Margaret's turn to fight the Yorkists. Present in the battle was her son, Edward, Prince of Wales, flanked by the French and reinforcements from this powerful family from Wales. But they too were no match for the Yorkists, led by, again, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, slowly becoming the MVP. Sa laban, namatay si Edward, Prince of Wales. The Lancastrian line of succession was severed, and Queen Margaret's hope died. Shortly after, King Edward IV returned to the throne, and Henry VI was once again thrown into prison. Just a few days later, Henry, England's weakest king, mysteriously died in captivity. Some said it was because of a broken heart, but when his body was examined more than 300 years later, they found blood and a dent on his skull caused by a fatal blow. He was definitely murdered. The question was, who did it? Ngayong wala ng Lancastrians, siguro naman tapos na to, di ba? Well, the question is, can the three brothers really trust each other? When someone betrays you and says sorry, what's your assurance that they'll stay loyal? Oh, and remember that powerful family from Wales? They were called the Tudors. See you in the next one. Follow for more, and boom! Now you know.